The chapter begins with a story in the Uber Empire. Having received power from the spirit of light, Millenio lit the sun, and the caster Frid summoned the spirit of darkness and created the night. And if the first gave vitality, then Frid gave peace. When Millenio illuminated the world with warm light, Frid cast a shadow on the world in which to hide from the light and heat. That's how the world, the Empire of Ubera, were created by their hands. Today's imperial family of Millenio, as well as Archdukes Fried, noble and beautiful, capable of controlling spirits, are the only ones in this empire. We see a huge kingdom, buildings, the architecture of which impresses with its small patterns. The weather is sunny, lots of greenery. Everything is blooming, everything is green. It is light inside the palace, the light passes through the windows. There are a lot of plants inside the rooms, everything is done in green and brown tones. A girl with light, golden hair and bright blue eyes is sitting in the hall. She is dressed in a blue uniform, with a bow tied on her hair. She's sitting in a chair, reading a book, thinking out loud. It's not even funny that they're the only ones. Her name is Dorothea Millenio. She is the princess of the Uber Empire. The boy approaches her and calls her Dorothy. She doesn't respond, so the boy keeps calling her. She gets annoyed with this, eventually tells him not to make noise. She called him Ray. After the words, she gets up and goes somewhere. The boy sees and does not understand where she is moving. He follows her around, asking for forgiveness. He asks if he is too noisy. He asks her not to be angry because he will be quiet. Dorothy reflects on what is so annoying around her right now. He doesn't even know how to put on airs. She calls him so pathetic. The boy's name is Raymond Millenio. He is a smiling, sympathetic boy with the same light, golden hair, and bright blue eyes. He still follows her around, offering to go together. He is the prince of the Uber Empire and Dorothy's obnoxious older brother. Dorothea looks at him with displeasure and annoyance. She tells the story that, to be more precise, he is the true heir, who once already died at the hands of Dorothy. We see a picture where they are already adults. Dorothy with a sword and in bloody clothes stands in front of Raymond, lying on the floor and bleeding. So, it turns out that now this is her second life, the last chance given to her, who lived her life as a tyrant, and she won't repeat the same regrets a second time. We see Dorothy bent down and sitting on her knees. Her hands are tied from behind and everything is red, resembling blood. The purpose of this life of hers is as follows: to live in a kind way. That's the lesson she learned from her past life. Good deeds are rewarded with happiness, and you pay for bad ones with misfortune. And then she was evil. She killed the crown prince and then seized the imperial throne of Ubera. She destroyed all the objectionable, and granted wealth and power to the pleasing. However, when she got everything, only the end was waiting for her. The one she loved hated her and chose death. And the people with whom she shared her power strangled her. People pointed at her, calling her a tyrant, and their anger burned down her palace and brought her to her death. It is true that such a life lesson is enough for her, and then she gladly accepted death. She wakes up, eyes and hears various affectionate words. She does not understand. They tell her, asking a rhetorical question, and how it is possible to be such a beauty. She doesn't understand what they're talking about right now. She is called Princess Dorothea. She was reborn into a princess, and we see her now as a baby, and she is really beautiful from birth. She, Dorothea Millenio, who kept the whole empire in fear, found a second life. Back to the present, when Raymond annoys Dorothy, she thinks that, right, maybe it was just a lesson for her to live right. A chance to turn back her life filled with evil and regrets. The murder of Ray and the seizure of the throne is the true birth of the tyrant Dorothea Millenio, and the beginning of all regrets. So she can't kill him again. She couldn't hate him, and no matter what he did, she would tolerate it. Raymond lovingly calls her by name and climbs up to her to hug. He asks if she is reading a difficult book again. It seems that their Dorothy is a real genius. He says that Dorothy is so small and cute. He wonders how she can also be so smart. Meanwhile, in Dorothy's head there is a desire to just kill him. She asks him to let her in. He kisses her on the cheeks and says that his Dorothy is so cute that it's already creepy. It is clear that Dorothy does not like it. She is not so tactile. She still asks to let her in. She reflects that she has never loved Ray. She tells him to teach the history of Ubera better himself. He shirks, saying that he's not as smart as she is, Dorothy. He has nothing but flowers and butterflies in his head. He asks with a big smile if she is bored to sit all day. Dorothy thinks he got more than she did just because he was born a prince. He invites her to go out to play. She is surprised that he is so peaceful, and replies that he will not go. If he wants to go, then let him go alone. He won't let up and says that he wants to play with her, Dorothy. A maid comes and tells Her Highness the Prince that it is impossible to distract the princess during her studies. He was sad. The maid sees the book in Dorothy's hands and, surprised, asks if she is already learning the history of Ubera. She bends down to look and says it looks like it's about the spirit of light. The maid then asks if she knows that the spirit stone that the first emperor owned was lost in the time of Teresa. Dorothy calls the maid a wet nurse and says that she was mistaken, because the light spirit stone disappeared in the time of Kors, and after all, there is almost 100 years difference between Kors and Nerja. The maid was already confused. In the background, the brother is delighted that Dorothy is so cool. The nurse asks if she has learned everything about the Millenio family. How can she be so smart? Dorothy is sorry and thinks that it looks like she should have pretended that she didn't know. The maid declares that His Majesty the Emperor is simply obliged to hear about her knowledge. Dorothy is alarmed by such a proposal and, turning to the nurse, says that there is no need to report to His Majesty, the Emperor Karnon Millenio. In other words, her father, the children are his copy. For Dorothy, the word father sounds like something far away, as if in a foreign language. She roughly understands how it can be translated, but does not feel the intonation and cannot convey its clear feeling. Of course, they are connected by blood, but it doesn't matter to her. After all, she could not inherit the right of Millenio. Her mother, Empress Alice, died as soon as she was born, because Karnon was indifferent to her, who was born at the expense of the life of his beloved wife, before she tried everything possible so that he noticed her. One day she fell right in front of his eyes, demonstrated her intelligence, tried her best to surpass Ray. She reaches out to her father, but he only removes her helping hand, judging and hating looking at her. He didn't look in her direction until the very end. But with Ray it was different. He didn't have to do anything to receive gifts from Karnon and have lunch together. He could ask Karnon an infinite number of questions and smile. But why did he love Ray more, who only knew how to smile stupidly and play in the sandbox? Why did he never look in her direction, even though she tried much harder? She is angry, gritting her teeth, why he did not choose her. She understands that she cannot tolerate Raymond. She hates him so much. A glass falls on the floor and shatters. She ended up attacking Ray. She is stopped by servants. She could only calm down when she tortured him properly and took away his things. The father, with a hateful look, gives the order to lock Dorothy in the room for a month. And the further, the more their relationship with Karnon resembled a diabolical vicious circle. The princess is sitting in her room, hugging a pillow, sobbing alone. She longed for love, but her life was too worthless for that. As if she wanted to reach the beautiful moon with her hands. Her love remained one-sided and did not reach him. That's how the seeds of evil were imbued with anger and guilt and sprouted. She was jealous and envious. He went over their heads and took away to satisfy his thirst. That's how all this gave birth to the tyrant Dorothea Millenio. Again, going back to the present, Dorothy, still reading the book, reflects that, of course, what difference does it make now? What were the reasons there? After all, she has now realized that it is useless to shift her own sins to others. It's just that her whole fault is that she doesn't evoke enough feelings of love. It's all right now, because she doesn't have any more regrets about Karnon. On the contrary, it's not bad to live like this without seeing a single shadow. Yes, and it will be more convenient to live this way, since she wants to be kind. All this time, while Dorothy is thinking what to read to her, the nurse is standing next to him and thinks that the Emperor will definitely be happy to see the princess. She feels sorry. The weather is fine outside. Dorothy is walking in the park. The nurse suggests that she take a walk in that direction today to unwind a little. The servant points to a garden surrounded by a fence and full of all sorts of plants and greenery. The princess looks and assumes that this is Alice's homeland. This is a garden created by Karnon for his wife Alice, who misses her homeland. She also often went there before her rebirth, but had not visited it for a long time. She doesn't understand why the maid suddenly suggested going there. While they were arriving, a servant greets their Majesty the Emperor. Dorothy turns around and sees her father. It is clear from him that he is also not happy to see the princess. He looks at her with a frown. Dorothy immediately becomes alert and wonders if she has already committed a stupid act. No worse than Ray. If she was impolite, maybe she has already made some mistake. What should she say? Finally, the canon asks the question, who are they that dared to enter Alice's garden? And then the princess realizes that yes, that's right, what else could she expect? And she was going to live this life in a kind way. Karnon asks who they are, since they dared to enter Alice's garden. The servant tells him that this is Princess Dorothea Millenio. He thinks about it, brings his hand to his chin and quietly says that it's crazy. Dorothy hears and repeats his phrase in her head. He looks at her haughtily and reproaches her for not even being able to greet him properly. Then he asks if she hasn't been taught that. Dorothy notices in her head that this is true, because she did not have parents who would teach her. The servant in a panic says that there is no way for His Majesty. She claims that the princess is very smart and exceptional. Karnan replies that he doubts, because for him she looks like a small and impudent girl. The nurse tries her best to justify Dorothy, saying that it's probably only because the princess is surprised to meet him for the first time, because she shines in etiquette classes at the palace. Then he turns to Dorothy with a question, "Isn't that right?" Dorothy sighs, takes a step towards Karnan, bows her head and body slightly, while holding the hem of her dress with both hands. She greets His Majesty the Emperor Millenio very politely. The Emperor asks her how old she is. The princess, still bowing, replies that she is turning 8 this year. He continues the interrogation, asking what is her such exclusivity. She, raising her head, says that this is just an exaggeration from the nurse. There is nothing exceptional about her. The nurse abruptly interrupts them, saying that as His Majesty sees, the princess is modest and perceptive beyond her years, and she has already learned the entire imperial pedigree. The princess is annoyed because there is absolutely no help from the maid. The Emperor bows after her words. He asks if it is true that she has learned the lineage of the Millenio family. Then he says testingly that if it's true, then let him tell. The princess confidently replies that for sure the Emperor is already aware of the palace pedigree. Is there really something unknown to him in the pedigree of the Millenio family? He aggressively asks if she really decided to check on him. The maid stands silently and awkwardly between them. The princess replies that it seems that it is he, His Majesty, who is testing her. What is the use of her telling the family tree here? He also does not let up and asks, so she resists the Emperor's order. In the eyes of the nurse, it looks like a den of wild animals. The princess finally says that she is only trying to save His Majesty's time. It is true that he is so busy that he has never seen her since her birth. The Emperor, folding his arms at his chest, says that, therefore, she will tell the pedigree only when it will benefit her. Dorothy replies that she just doesn't want to waste her and his time. The Emperor thinks about it and finally says that since the words of the nurse are true, then in that case, he asks Dorothea Millenio to say if there is something she would like to tell. Dorothy is surprised. She does not understand. To say what she wants. For what? Because in her memory Karnan has never said anything like that to her. She suspects he's up to something. She's still silent. She reflects that before rebirth she would have jumped for joy. But, unfortunately, she does not need anything from him now. She alone can't just keep silent. She eventually asks in this case to make her the best wine under her name. She decided to ask for something that could play into her hands in the future. The Emperor immediately became gloomy. He turns to the nurse and asks what she is teaching the child here. Is it appropriate for a child of this age to say such a thing? She makes excuses that she never talked about alcohol in front of the princess. Then the princess intervenes and says that it wasn't the nurse who taught her. She read about it in a book called Portrait of Bablua. She says that there is a scene where Bablua and his beloved drank old wine, described by the author as something very refined. Therefore, out of curiosity, she wanted to try a good wine at least once. The Emperor is surprised by this answer, because such a young girl reads such a difficult Portrait of Bablua. He thinks about it and finally agrees, saying that as she wants, a fine wine bearing her name will be prepared. Then he sets a condition that if she makes a mistake at least once, he will sentence her nurse, who lied to him, to death. He gives the order to tell the family tree of the imperial family. She bows her head and reflects that maybe she inherited her tyrant nature from her father. She finally says that it is good and then she will start with the first ancestors on the direct branch of Millenio. And yet she decided to be kind, so the nurse's life needs to be saved. After this incident, the nurse expected that the Emperor would be interested in Dorothy, but Karnan never visited her. The servant calls her poor thing, and yet the Emperor is the father of the princess. She can't come to her because of her huge employment. From what she heard, the princess only mentally asks the servant to stop, because Karnan is not one of those. The nurse was upset every time, but, frankly, she can only be grateful for it. After all, her mood deteriorates when she sees the Emperor, and for a prosperous life, it is best to avoid sources of bad mood. In a previous life, she would have gone out of her way just to show her best side than Ray. And surely Karnan would have punished her several times already. She reflects on what a fool she was because she amused herself with useless illusions, and she herself was upset. But now she realized everything. She is reading a book in the garden and thinking about everything. A wet nurse is standing next to her. For the sake of her well-being, it's better to just do nothing. And as soon as she decides to do something, she will only cause his anger and discontent. So, she is pulled out of her thoughts by Ray's kind question. "Where is Dorothy?" She hears, her mood immediately deteriorates. The servant asks the prince what brought him here. He asks if Dorothy is here. The princess immediately runs away with a request that the nurse say that she is not there. The servant doubts what to say to him, and then she herself wonders where she is. Ray says that she wanted to show the princess how to handle the spirit of light. Dorothy, who hid behind a pillar, does not understand why she should watch him control the spirit of light. Did he decide to laugh at her, which already infuriates her? The spirit of light is called a blessing that is available only to the Millennial family, but this is just an old story. We see how Ray shows in front of the nurse how he can control the petals in the air, directing them in different directions so that what kind of image comes out of it. The power of the Millennial family, which once lit the sun, has completely weakened, and now only small lights can be lit with its help. And over time, those who can't control spirits at all, such as her, began to be born in the Millennial family. The princess who can't summon a single spirit, Dorothea Millennial, that's how she was completely excluded from this tradition. So there was another reason why neither people nor Karnan liked her. So she decided to go against the gods and hated Ray even more. What is the use of a pathetic spirit of light, a tiny firefly that retains its influence only thanks to a thin thread of history? Therefore, she took away this influence from him, ascended the throne on her own, and put an end to the era of legends. So she proclaimed the era of people, raising a bloody sword to the sky. But, in the end, everything turned out to be a failure. After all, she was executed, called a tyrant, just a little after the seizure of power. Maybe, indeed, it is the spirits that determine the future emperor and her inglorious end. Only the punishment that the legend brought down on the head of the princess who showed excessive impudence. Of course, it doesn't matter now. She sits and thinks when this little bastard who talks to the wet nurse will leave. He asks again if she doesn't know exactly where Dorothy is, to which the nurse regretfully says that she doesn't know for sure. The prince is sad because a friend came to him and he wanted to introduce them. Dorothy, who hears all this, assumes that it is probably some kind of Ray's age, from whom there is no less noise. She decided to leave Ray to the wet nurse, and she'd better go to sleep. She goes and thinks that if she turns here, it will be difficult to get to her room unnoticed from Ray. The main thing is not to get caught. She turns the corner and runs into another boy with dark hair. Dorothy falls from the collision, dropping the book. The boy immediately apologizes and asks if she was hurt badly. She looks up and immediately blushes. She thinks and does not understand what he is doing here because it is impossible. The man she loved more than anyone in the world before rebirth. A phrase pops up in her head asking her to remember only one thing, that her greed ruined him. And then the picture where he is already dead. He was a man who hated her more than life. Then we see a picture where she, seeing the body of her lover, cries and rushes to him. That's right, how can she forget him? Because he was her love, her breath, her eternity. Back to reality. The boy asks Dorothy if she is okay. He holds out his hand to her and asks if she can get up. Since the day of her return, she had not forgotten about him for a second. She gets up hot with tears in her eyes and calls him by the name Theon. The boy looks at her in surprise and says that he really apologizes, whether it hurts her very much. Dorothy is sitting with her face in her hands. He looks at the dress and says that, wow, and the clothes are very dirty. He says it's his fault for not being attentive enough. He holds out a handkerchief and asks for a start to take at least this. He worries and asks again if she has twisted her leg, if she can walk, or if it's better for him to call someone. She says emotionally that she wanted to see him so much. The boy thinks that, it turns out, he heard everything correctly. Does she really know him? He does not understand. She continues to cry, tears flow like a stream. She wipes everything with this handkerchief. He reflects that something else is much more important now. He asks her not to cry, otherwise her eyes will swell. He wipes the tears from Dorothy's face with his fingers. Dorothy's heart is pounding wildly, because the one who turned away and left her is now next to her, so beautifully alive, and this is not a dream. She starts crying even more. Maybe just because he's alive means she's done her duty in this life. He smiles and tells her that she is smart, someone who may well be the cause of her rebirth. Ray is coming, calling Dorothy. He asks if she really hurt herself, if everything is all right. He is very worried. He runs straight to her still with questions about what happened. He sees a bruise on her knee and a crumpled, dirty dress. She, still with tears in her eyes, replies that nothing terrible has happened. He has nothing to worry about. Ray pounces on Theon, grabs his shoulder and asks if Dorothy is crying because of him. Theon sadly replies that it is possible. He lowers his gaze and head and continues to say that it looks like it is and asks for forgiveness. Ray gets angry and calls Theon a real scoundrel. He shouts to him that he thought they could become good friends and that Dorothy had never cried so much for anyone before. Then he asks what he did to Dorothy. Theon is trying to justify himself to His Highness Raymond. Then Dorothy intervenes and asks Ray to stop, because she wasn't crying because of Theon. He shrugs off that she just got something in her eye. She says that some kind of speck got caught, so the eye got sick. He nervously asks if everything is okay then now. She replies that everything is fine and at the same time thinks that she did not expect that the day would come when she would gratefully think what a fool Ray is. Ray is worried and finally calms down. What a relief. He asks what happened to the knee wound then. She replies that it is shallow and it will heal in a moment. Theon on the sidelines realizes that this is a princess and that she also covered his rudeness in front of his brother. But he can't meet the princess before. He wonders what kind of expression was on her face when she first saw him. Ray turns to Theon and sincerely apologizes for having misunderstood everything. Theon smiles and says it's nothing, because he really was to blame. Ray takes him by the shoulder and they stand in front of Dorothy. The prince says with joy that he will present him properly, since he had the chance. He calls him his new friend in front of Dorothy. Theon worships and says he was rude the first time they met. Dorothy realizes that she was going to be introduced to Theon. He takes Dorothy's pen, introduces Theon to Frid, and kisses her hand. Dorothy blushes and thinks that this is their new beginning. There is no history between them. If she forgets about her thirst for love and breaks out of the shackles of the failures of the past days, if her love is something more for Theon, maybe then he will look at her in this life. She wanted to say something to him with joy, but then someone turns to Theon and says that she wanted to go together, so why did he go alone? Dorothy knows this voice. She turns around and recognizes the girl as Theon's first and last love. In front of them is a girl with soft pink, long hair in a red sundress. Her name is Julia de Lavendy. Because of the agreements between the families and her stubbornness, Theon had no choice but to marry Dorothy, but he loved only Julia until his death. These two had been close since childhood and shared a huge affection, and their relationship was so special that two perfectly matching puzzles between which Dorothy, could not squeeze through. After all, that was her life. She longed for Carnon's love, but she couldn't get it. She longed for Theon's love, but he didn't give it to Dorothy either. The life of someone who didn't deserve love. Even after marrying her, Theon was always looking for Julia. The dozens of letters he and Julia exchanged behind her back filled with expectation, an expression he never showed Dorothy. She prayed that Julia would disappear. No, she wished that she would die and could not be with him. And when a loyal servant with a solid track record brought the news of Julia's death, she was very happy, flattering herself with illusions that now Theon would come to her. But he escaped from her embrace, although he had to choose death, and he went to where Julia was. His death was caused only by her greed. Her selfish love killed him. Can she call it love? This feeling in her chest, which seems to be tearing into pieces. The boys switch to Julia. Ray informs that Julia has come. Theon says that he asked her to wait for him. Julia replies that she was so bored. Ray introduces Julia de Lavendy to Dorothy and says that she came with Theon from the Duchy of Phrygia. Julia greets Princess Dorothy. She replies to her only a short hello. She continues to think that these two are together even in this life. She wonders what kind of expression she has on her face now. For sure she is filled with this feeling, so it looks unpleasant. She says she remembered that she had things to do, so he will go to the room. Ray asks Dorothy if she will play with them, but she just leaves without answering. Ray doesn't understand what's wrong with her all of a sudden. Theon and Julia also look at each other uncomprehendingly. She goes to her room. Of course, the prince who died by her hand, the beloved who chose death to get rid of her, and his innocently executed beloved, she has no place among them. She hurriedly goes to her room with tears in her eyes from such a terrible confession of herself. The servant asks if she wants to play with her friends. Dorothy, lying in an empty dark room, replies that she does not want to because she is tired. The servant obeys and says that then nothing can be done. Let him rest, and she will wake Dorothy before dinner. The servant leaves. Dorothy lies holding Theon's name handkerchief in her hand, with his name embroidered on the edge of the material. She hugs this handkerchief tightly to herself and cries bitterly. It's a clear day outside. The sun is shining brightly. There are no clouds in the sky. In the palace sits a smart Dorothy reading a book. In the background, someone is walking back and forth quickly and loudly. Dorothy gets annoyed, closes the book, and asks Ray if he can't sit still. He replies that he is so worried, because today he will officially become the crown prince. She says that's right, she will become the crown prince of Ubera. This is a very important role. He says that this makes it even more scary. He turns to Dorothy and asks if he looks like the Crown Prince. Dorothy looks at Ray and sees in him only a cute puppy who whines with all his appearance. She replies that no, he looks like a fool today too. He is sad and asks if this is really true. Dorothy asks him to do something with his face first. He asks how to do it with his face. He squeezes his cheeks with his palms and asks if it is necessary. Dorothy thinks that this hopeless fool should run the empire. She has a lot of worries. Ray says that it would be nice if he did not become the heir, but Dorothy, she stiffens and clutches the book. He continues to argue that for sure she would not have trembled, but proudly passed the ceremony, because she is smarter than him. More talented, he is sure that she would have become an excellent empress. Dorothy only replies that she doesn't know how to summon spirits, so she can't. The one with a smile and actively says that he knows she will also soon be able to summon spirits. Who, if not the clever Dorothy, to summon them? This carefree simplicity of his is like poison to Dorothy. She thinks that he is behaving this way only because he does not know anything and will gradually understand everything over time. He will understand the full weight of carelessly thrown words. Ray asks her if she could wish him luck once. She answers with a question, why would she do that? He begs her because if his Dorothy wishes him luck, he is sure that he will succeed perfectly. Dorothy only replies with displeasure that he just failed. He is upset. He says that Dorothy is so cold. He asks to hug his brother just once. Dorothy only indifferently tries to leave, to hide somewhere from him. She only ignores all his requests and supplications. The servant informs that Ray will need to enter soon, which makes him even more worried. The ceremony of handing over the crown is an event when the next successor of the emperor is named. It can be considered one of the main events in the empire. But if you think about it, she didn't notice it before, but now everything seems very modest to her. She looks around and concludes in her head that Carnon is not as vain as he seems. But she still doubts, maybe she's just a spender. She begins to remember something, which in childhood is for sure. Here they announce that His Majesty the Emperor is entering. Even this event seemed luxurious to Dorothy. The Emperor begins his monologue, saying that the whole empire will be illuminated by the benevolent light of Millennium. Now Dorothy has stopped experiencing any emotions. She looks at the scenery and thinks that there must be a missing spiritual stone in this scepter. She thinks and reflects that a fragment of that stone was found. Right before the execution she heard something similar, but does not remember what exactly. The monologue continues in the background. The princess continues to think that it doesn't matter, it's nothing to do with her now anyway. They announce that they will now proceed to the ceremony. The door opens with a creak. Ray enters, smiling and confident. Dorothy looks and hopes that he will not make a mistake. Ray catches her eye and immediately smiles broadly. Dorothy raises her index finger in a sign of prohibition. She thinks, why did he make such a stupid face? She tries to tell him to look ahead and walk properly. He sees and just nods his head. Dorothy even more does not understand why he nods his head. Is he really a fool? Suddenly, all the spirits flock to her. She tries to make it clear to Ray that he normally controls the spirits. She believes that now such a fool becomes the crown prince. She would not have made such a mistake. A large crown is put on Ray. Dorothy looks and comes to the conclusion that she has no right to such thoughts, but at least it would be better if a real hero became the emperor this time. The ceremony continues. Numerous guests congratulate the crown prince on the event. The emperor walks in front with the crown prince, and Dorothy walks alone behind them. Everything that is said to them is a sign of congratulations. The princess does not hear. She reflects on her own that for her the surname Millennium is like a curse. The woman turns her attention and looks at Dorothy and says that over time she increasingly resembles the late empress. The other agrees and says that she really is a complete copy of her in her youth. The fact that Dorothy must always resist such situations, and also, the emperor replies to the woman that they are talking utter nonsense. They only ask him for forgiveness for their words and for their rudeness, and the fact that she cannot leave this place even when she is openly rejected. Carnon and Ray are at the center of any conversation, and it is treated no better than a candlestick fixed in the wall. But she can't go anywhere since she's a Millennium. Before rebirth, she would have gone to the center and began to show her importance, thereby emphasizing what a fool Ray is. Ray turns to her and tells her to go to them. Dorothy continues to think that there is not a single such thought in her head right now. She doesn't understand what's funny about all this. She just wants this time to end soon. She keeps calling Ray a fool, and that this is his place. She can't claim him. Even if he calls her, the problem won't be solved. And since she should just be standing here, it would be better to prepare a place for her to sit down. Theon comes up to her and says that she's bored. It's true. She turns around and immediately recognizes the voice. She sees a beautifully dressed Theon in front of her, with a red bow around his neck and a glass in his hand. Theon approaches Dorothy with a question, because she is bored. Is it so? Dorothy wonders why he is here. She thought he would be with Julia. He holds out a glass with a drink and asks her to drink it, because he sees that she hasn't had anything for a long time. Dorothy is glad that he noticed it, because it means that he was watching her all the time. She smiles broadly, stretches out her hand to take the glass and thanks Theon. She has thoughts in her head that this is pomegranate juice from Theon. She even feels sorry to drink. Theon says that Mr. Raymond was very proud of her, namely her open-mindedness. She asks again about Ray, who answers affirmatively that yes, that he says that Dorothy is learning all the Imperial knowledge. Dorothy says she's not that great. Theon says it looks like they'll be able to meet in Epistemia soon. She holds a glass in her hand and thinks about the words. Epistemia is the best academy in the Empire, where only the most outstanding talents are trained, as well as the main place where the descendants of noble families, studying together, acquire connections for the future. There are people not only from Ubera, but also from neighboring Narora, descendants of noble families come to Epistemia. However, unlike Ray, who could easily get into this academy, Dorothy, due to the fact that she should not outshine the Crown Prince, could not get into the Epistemium. One day she tried to resist this, went outside the palace and threw a stone towards Epistemia. But this stone broke the window and hit the eldest son of Duke Bronte on the head. And after that Carnon locked Dorothy in the castle. Then the end was put in their relationship with Carnon. She thinks that there is no need to repeat this twice. She has long since abandoned any claims. She tells Theon out loud that she won't go to Epistemia. He asks how much, because she is a princess. He begins to say that he is sure of something for sure, but he looks forward, sees the Emperor with Ray. Dorothy notices this and thinks that Theon is pretty smart, so he knows how to shut up when he needs to, and that he understood exactly what the situation is here. She was sad because she didn't want to show herself to Theon like that. She decides to turn the conversation to any other topic. She smiles and starts saying that, if you think about it, the weather is today. She doesn't finish, because Julia shouts that Theon is called by the Archduke. Julia smiles brightly and waves at them. Theon apologizes to the princess, saying that it looks like it's time for him to go. She replies that nothing can be done. In her head, she thinks Julia has come to pick up Theon. Theon says goodbye, saying that they will see each other later. She remains alone again among numerous people. She thinks she needs to go to the room, too. Amid the hubbub and noise, she approaches the Emperor, saying that she has something to say. But suddenly some man accidentally pushes her and pomegranate juice spills on her dress, soiling the entire front of her clothes. The first thing Dorothy thinks about is that Theon gave her this pomegranate juice. The man panics and does not know what to do. The Emperor sees and asks what is going on here. The man apologizes and says that this is his mistake. The Emperor orders Dorothy to apologize to the man. She doesn't understand why. The Emperor hurries her to say it quickly. Everyone in the hall fell silent in anticipation. Ray intervenes, addressing the Emperor, saying that it was Dorothy who suffered. Here Dorothy simply and quickly apologizes to the man, whose name is Duke Bronte. She bends down in front of him, looking down. Duke Bronte does not understand and is worried, because he understands perfectly well that he is clearly to blame here. Dorothy says in her mind that she should apologize to Duke Bronte, because he is a much more important guest than the cardboard princess. The Duke says it's okay, because it was his mistake. She continues to think and wonder what is difficult about some kind of apology, because Carnon has been behaving like this for more than a day or two. The Duke asks Dorothy to raise her head. She continues to think that if she takes everything to heart and gets upset, it will only make her worse. So she only needs to take it for granted. The Emperor orders the servant Robert to escort Dorothy, because her clothes are dirty. He listens and bows before him. The princess thinks it's a good thing because she has an excuse to leave, and that's enough. She goes with the servant, but decides to accidentally turn back. She sees Theon and Julia standing in complete shock. They show that they are worried. She asks herself if he has seen an awkward princess who has lost her last authority. She wants him not to look at her like that. She reflects that a glass of juice filled with scarlet love has been spilled again by emotions that have stained her. She is sitting alone in her room again, hugging her knees. To endure such a Carnon attitude towards her and apologize, leaving aside pride, is tolerable for her. But one look from Theon made her feel like she was being turned inside out. How funny, because she knows that Theon will never love her. She understands what to let go. However, it seems as if everything inside is on fire when she sees them together with Julia. She decides that she needs to let Theon go as soon as possible. Someone knocks and asks if she's okay. Ray is standing outside the door and says he came because he was worried. He asks her to come out to him. Dorothy gets angry and shouts at him to leave her alone and go back to his place. Ray insists that she won't go because she's here in the room. He explains that he is not interested in the reception, so let them play together. From these words, Dorothy becomes furious, leaves the room and orders him to open his ears and listen carefully. Ray is scared of her. She shouts at him that he can't leave there just because he's not interested, since he's the crown prince. So let him behave appropriately. Let him stop thinking only about games and do what he has to. She goes on to say that his worries here have not surrendered to anyone. She pushes him and asks him to just leave her alone. Ray doesn't know what to say. She continues that if he understood, then let. Suddenly, Theon and Julia come up to them and see her holding him by the collar. Theon asks, startled, if she's okay. Dorothy just looks at Theon in silence, confused. Theon, looking scared, asks if Dorothy is okay. She just looks at him in silence. Ray says he brought Theon and Julia to play together. She lets go of Ray, walks into the room and slams the door. Dorothy just stands at the door at first, and then weakly kneels down. She remembers Theon's frightened face and Julia's surprised expression. She wonders at what point everything went wrong. What will he think of her now? She thinks of herself as a pathetic and undeserving love. She concludes how much she hates herself. She covers her face with her hands and cries bitterly. She thinks she should live a kinder life than anyone else. This is a way of redemption for her. After that day, she couldn't get out of bed for several days. Her temperature rose and her whole body ached. The nurse takes care of her, calls her their little unhappy princess and says that she should get well as soon as possible. Although it hurts her, but she must endure. She opens her eyes, repeats the phrase that she should be kinder than anyone. She doesn't finish it and falls asleep again. After all, right now it's the only thing she can do. So a few days flew by, during which Ray did not come to her. She is in her room on her bed reading a book again. She thinks he hates her now because she yelled at him like that back then. She thinks he annoyed her after all, so she's even glad. Her thought is interrupted. She sees someone out of the corner of her eye. She sighs and asks Ray, who is hiding, what he is doing. He is frightened by the question, comes out and says that he brought her a gift. Dorothy says it's not necessary. Ray says that she will definitely like this gift. He opens the basket and says that these are the first tomatoes he has grown. It turns out he secretly made a garden behind the palace. Dorothy clearly did not expect such a gift and is clearly not thrilled with it. Ray nervously asks if they have a beautiful color. He continues to say in excitement that he has also planted zucchini and eggplant. As soon as they grow, he will first of all bring. At this time, Dorothy thinks that the crown prince, who was officially accepted into Epistemia, was wasting his time on the garden and plowing. She asks if he was not engaged in science, but grew this. He is even more nervous and replies that he also studied regularly. Dorothy sighs heavily and thinks that someone tried their best to win against him. And unlike Dorothy, he got everything effortlessly. He only played his favorite games all the time and took the place of the legitimate crown prince. Ray is worried and says that he really studied hard. He asks her if she is angry and asks for forgiveness. He mumbles that she refused last time, and he begged her to play with him. He clasps his hands against his palms, waiting for an answer. Dorothy relents and calls him. He listens to her attentively. Dorothy finally says that this way he will not be able to become a good emperor. After all, Dorothy decided to live kinder than anyone else this time. Ray scratches his head and agrees, saying that's right. Dorothy still thinks that after all, this desire not to let him become emperor is only because he cannot escape from the fate of a tyrant. Ray asks her to try the tomato after all, they are probably delicious. He says he brought them as soon as he picked them, and, of course, in Epistemia he will try his best and will be a great big brother. He smiles at her happily. Dorothy turns away from him and thinks that it would be better if this fool did his job better properly. He mumbles again in hope and asks if she doesn't want to go outside sometimes. He says that he thought it was stuffy for her to sit in the palace all the time. Dorothy thinks that after all, if you think about it, she has not been outside the fortress wall until now, because she does not even study in Epistemia. But in her previous life she was so bored that now she is not even curious, but he already knows all this. Ray already says loudly and confidently that she has never been outside the palace, and it's stuffy to sit inside all the time. Last time they stopped at the market, and there were a lot of goods from different parts of the continent. Dorothy is silent. He keeps saying that if she goes outside, he is sure that she will like it too, and she will feel a lot, since she is so smart, so maybe they will go outside with him. Here Dorothy interrupts him, saying she doesn't want to. Ray, almost with tears in her eyes, asks why she doesn't want to. She says she just doesn't want to. After that, Ray always followed Dorothy around with an offer to go outside together, to which she only briefly replied that she did not want to. And Ray wouldn't let up. He was already begging and begging her. Dorothy thought that he would calm down if she refused. However, when she opened the book, she found a note asking her to go together, and Ray's happy face immediately appeared. Dorothy decides she can't take it anymore and eventually agrees. Ray, of course, is happy, but here Dorothy makes a condition that she will go alone. She can go with a nurse or a night escort, but she will not go with him, Ray. Ray is sad, but still agrees because Dorothy agreed to go outside. Then the nurse tells the princess that how wonderful it is. Dorothy apologizes and asks if she should definitely go out in such clothes. She replies that, of course, because it suits her so well. Dorothy is dressed in a light knee-length dress of pale blue and lilac with flowers and bows. Her hair is loose, a flower is attached to her ear. Dorothy says she's so uncomfortable. The nurse says that she wanted to put these clothes on her so much, and finally the day has come when she will be able to see the sparkle of her walking outfit. The nurse concludes that she is so glad. She takes Dorothy's hand and tells them to go faster before she changes her mind. Dorothy is already regretting that she decided to go out. They find themselves in a market full of people. As soon as the thought flashes through Dorothy's mind that there are a lot of people here, the maid confirms her thoughts with a question. Because there are a lot of people here. The nurse advises to hold her hand tightly so as not to get lost and holds out her hand to Dorothy. The princess at first thinks that she is not a child, although now she is, of course, a child. She takes the nurse by the hand. In her previous life, she had never walked hand in hand with anyone here. She turns her face away from the nurse because she is embarrassed. The nurse asks to look at her in one direction and asks what she is looking at for the first time from here. She sees the sky endlessly, which shimmers with the sea. Everything is bright blue and green. She sees the whole area, how people work and talk, how people walk by the fountain. She remembers the war-weary city and the streets of people who looked more like corpses. In her memory there was a wind soaked with the smell of blood. She sees the whole expanse now and concludes that this is what an empire looks like without a tyrant. The nurse draws Dorothy's attention to the square where the musicians are giving a performance and suggests going to see it once. Dorothy wonders if she can enjoy this world a little. She squeezes the nurse's hand tighter and they walk towards the square. From the corner, a suspicious man can be seen grinning at the sight of the princess. Dorothy is 9 years old. She is lying tied up on the dirty floor. Her eyes are also tied. She can't see anything. There is a conversation going on in the background. It turns out she was kidnapped to get a ransom. Two criminals are sitting at a table and appetitiously eating chicken and discussing that some girl is wearing clothes more expensive than their whole house is worth, which infuriates them. Dorothy thinks that after rebirth, she has never picked up a sword, and that's what happened. Let's go back to the events that happened 3 days ago. The nurse enthusiastically asks how a princess can be such a cutie. Dorothy looks at herself in the mirror. She's wearing a witch hat. The nurse admires each image and offers to just buy everything. Dorothy asks to wait, but the nurse drags her to another place because it's fun there. Dorothy wishes she hadn't come out again. They walk quietly down the street. The nurse offers to buy her favorite books before returning to the palace since they are out. She says if you go into that alley, they'll see a bookstore. From such a proposal, Dorothy already had a desire. The nurse also suggests after going to the bookstore to go eat delicious desserts, and that this is a short way, so there are no people here at all. The wet nurse keeps saying she wants to see Dorothy happy, but they are followed by a man with a baton and hits the nurse on the head with it, that she just falls unconscious to the ground. Dorothy tries to make sense of what happened and wants to help the nurse, but a handkerchief stuffed with poison is brought to her nose and mouth, from which she slowly loses consciousness. And the last thing she hears is an offer to go have dessert with her uncle. Once she was an empress, and now she's lying like this in some kind of kidnapper's basement. It's hard to imagine a more pitiful sight. She thinks it's okay even if she dies early, but still she wouldn't want to die at the hands of such crooks. The two discuss that the wet nurse was sent for money 3 days ago, but still no news. Another suggests that for sure they will need time to prepare everything and deliver it to the Scarlet Well. Dorothy hears this and is surprised that she has been unconscious for 3 whole days. She was thinking why she has no strength and is so thirsty. She thinks that since they have sent a wet nurse, something will happen next anyway, but Karnan may refuse her. She assumes that Karnan will think that since they want money, they can get rid of her as if she were a played card. She decides that she cannot completely trust Karnan alone. Dorothy makes a sound. The two turn to her, assuming she's awake. She says out loud that she can't see anything. This method is not in her style. She orders them to untie her. A man approaches her. She thinks that first she needs to pretend to be a weak little girl. The man unties her eyes. She innocently greets him and politely asks the uncle who he is. He smiles, calls her a cute little girl. He introduces himself to Tudu. In her head, she thinks that these two are the kidnappers, but they look like some market bandits who have rolled out of nowhere. She asks him sweetly again, is he really going to be her wet nurse now? He replies that no, of course, he is not a wet nurse. Dorothy makes an innocent face and asks if he's really Dad's friend. And in her head she is just angry that her ladyship Dorothea Millenio was forced to portray such a thing. The guy laughs and says that's right, he's a friend of her dad. Dorothy asks if she can then call him Uncle Tudu, to which he happily agrees and allows. And in Dorothy's head, she thinks she's going to kill them. She is told that she is as beautiful as a doll, it seems, thanks to her noble origin. She remembers the past from the phrase that she is beautiful, where someone says that he is ready to do anything just to have a smile on her lips. The man who kissed her hand and asked her to smile at least once. There used to be one person who repeated the same thing to her over and over again. She concludes that, of course, she does not like her appearance, but it seems that she does not seem so terrible to others. She pretends to look around and asks where they are. He replies that they are at their uncle's house. She looks at his face and asks about the scar above his eyebrow, what is it and what is cool. Tudu decides to tell the whole story. He says that before the uncle fought with terrible villains, 17 against 1. But the only weapon that could be used were his own fists. But one of these cowards pulled a knife out from under his clothes and attacked him, aiming at the heart, but he was able to dodge. Then he ends up saying that this is nothing, because after that Uncle Tudu drove the enemy into the forest, where he met with a bear. Dorothy, sitting next to him, just tries to listen carefully and clap her hands, like in admiration. In her head, she thinks that he wrote books better. But thanks to this, Dorothy had time to examine. She reflects and comes to the conclusion that, firstly, the situation is unprofitable. Her stomach rumbles. She pulls the edge of her uncle's t-shirt and says pityingly that she wants to eat. He exclaims that their little mistress is hungry and turns to Denny's, telling him this. He only indifferently answers with a question, and so what? Tudu says they have lunchtime, and the girl hasn't eaten for a long time. He sighs and says, okay to him, as if they have a children's camp here. Dorothy sees delicious sausages, scrambled eggs, bread and a whole chicken with lettuce leaves. She thinks they are enjoying a delicious meal, dreaming of the money they will get thanks to her abduction. She finds it disgusting, of course, but she has not experienced such a strong hunger for a long time. Tudu takes her in his arms, lifts her up and puts her at the table like a little child. Another asks where she sat down and let her go. He tells Tudu to pull himself together. Did he decide to play with her? He tries to justify himself, and Dorothy builds pleading and pitying eyes. He orders Tudu to tie her to a post. He resists, saying that he is an uncle. The other is just mad about this. At this time, Dorothy feels unwell and asks herself if she hasn't eaten for only 3 days. She feels like even more. Another guy tells Dorothy that they are not her uncles, and that they grabbed and kidnapped her. She plaintively asks why they did this. He pulls her by the hand and says that because of such rich dolls like her, everything inside turns over, which is already sickening to endure. She gets hit by pushing against the wall with her back. Then Denny says that this is too much. The other does not agree, because it will happen sooner or later anyway. He asks Tudu if he really wants to die first. She was tied up at the stake. She is treated like a thing. It is unpleasant for her. Denny's calls Tudu a weakling and suddenly screams in fright. Tudu also does not understand what happened. Denny's says that there is something under the table that has such sparkling eyes in the dark. Dorothy wonders what scared them so much. It's a scorpion. She thinks that there are no scorpions in the capital in that case. Meanwhile, Tudu and Denny's get scared and throw the responsibility of killing the scorpion on each other. Dorothy thinks she's hungry here, and they're yelling here. She suggests to the kidnappers that if she catches a scorpion, will they give her bread and milk? They do not believe and ask again if she will catch a scorpion. Dorothy replies that she will only need 2 sticks. They agree, but only if she catches a scorpion. Denny's orders Tudu to untie her. He unties her with a shudder, gives her chopsticks. She thinks that he has already looked at the gambling sticks. She does not understand why Scorpio scared them so much. She holds a scorpion by the tail with these sticks and informs that she has finally caught it. Those two tell her to throw him out or kill him. Dorothy says that she does not know how to kill. She is so hungry that she has no strength in her hands. Denny's tells her to throw it out, and as soon as she throws it out, they will give her food. She holds out the scorpion to them and asks, and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow they will also give food. They only quickly agree. She goes with this scorpion down a long staircase. They understand why it's dark all the time. They were underground. She goes out and sees the desert. She now understands why they don't really watch her. No matter where she looks, it's completely unclear where it's fashionable to go in this endless desert. She does not understand where the village is and who can know that she is here now. That's why she can't just run away. How can she find hope here? While the two are discussing something enthusiastically, Dorothy is eating bread. She thinks that they still keep their word, and that another scorpion would appear. Tudu shouts to Denny's that a princess has disappeared in the capital. They both look at Dorothy, continuing to say that someone has kidnapped her. Denny's understood something and tells Tudu to follow him. Dorothy silently wonders who it could be, but it was worth keeping everything a secret, if only for the sake of the well-being of the Imperial Palace. If these two want to survive, then they will not give her to the palace. She gets up from the table and reflects that, as she thought, waiting for Karnan is a crazy idea. She found a knife and decides that this should be enough. She overhears a conversation where they discuss future plans. They argue whether to take her life, because she is a child, but at the same time she is a princess. If she survives, she will betray them, and they will both end up in the grave. They decide that one will go get 2 camels, and the other will deal with the girl at this time. Dorothy realizes that her fate has already been determined. She looks at her reflection on the blade of the knife, so she had no choice but to pick up a knife. Denny's abruptly opens the door and says that they are in complete trouble, but he sees that the room is empty. She hid behind the door while he was looking for her. Then she decides to attack him with a knife. She realizes that there are few opportunities. There is only one way to win, since she is at a disadvantage. She swings and only scratches his back with the knife. He turns to her. Dorothy realizes that she has too little strength. The knife did not go deep, in that case further. She doesn't finish the thought because Denny's grabs her by the throat. But Dorothy wanted to stab his hand with a knife, but Denny's removes the knife from her hands and holds them tightly. The knife just falls to the floor with a sound. Denny's is furious. Dorothy doesn't have the strength, so she can't attack if she was even a little stronger. Denny's screams that he just wanted to let her die peacefully. He tells her not to twitch, because no matter how much she flutters, she can't do anything. From these words, Dorothy calms down and thinks about the phrase, "Is there absolutely nothing she can do?" She starts to get angry. Her teeth are grinding from these thoughts, that no matter how much she fluttered, she could not defeat Ray and could not get into epistemia. She kicks Denny's in the stomach so that he leans back. She continues to emotionally reflect on all the failures that he has not yet been able to attract Karnan's attention. She remembers Theon and concludes that he did not love her either. She takes a knife in her hand. And again she remembers that in the future, the subjects she trusted should also kill her. She stabs Denny's with a knife. Only his screams of pain are heard. He lies curled up and holding a leg pierced with a knife. Denny's begs her not to kill him. Dorothy sees those eyes again, the ones she often saw before rebirth. The eyes looking at the monster. She wonders why. She just wanted to live. She finally speaks out loud and asks that she just be left alone, and that she promised to be a good girl. She turns around and thinks again why everyone just can't leave her alone. Now she just wants everyone to let her just live to die. She goes out into the desert. She coughs from the wind and realizes that the sun is already setting. Night is already falling. She is cold from the wind. There is not a light in this desert. She is afraid of her impotence. She thinks that if she could control the spirit of light, it would be better for her than it is now. But then she thinks that no, if Ray were in her place now, surely everyone would have already come to save him. She falls to her knees and realizes that even now she is thinking about it. She considers herself ridiculous. She falls with her whole body on the sand and loses consciousness. A dark night full of bright stars and fluffy clouds. She moves her index finger slightly, opens her eyes and vaguely sees the desert and the bottomless, dark sky. She realizes that she has lost consciousness, wonders how much time has passed, and concludes that she will just die here. She thinks that dying alone, looking at the stars, is somehow too much for her. She sees a light on the horizon. She sees this light, hears the sound of hooves approaching her. She kneels down and calls God merciless. She thought she was finally dying, but he gives her the will to live again. She raises her hand and says softly that she is here. She has killed so many people in the past, but she still wants to live. She thinks maybe it was Karnan who sent them after her, but she also assumes that it could be bandits again. She collapses on the sand again. People have always turned away from her, but only such thoughts come into her head. It's funny to her, of course, but she's always been like that. Servants approach her and try to do something. Dorothy still thinks she wants to believe that someone will love her one day. Her name is Princess. She wants to believe that at least someone will love her. She slowly opens her eyes. She sees everything vaguely at first, and then everything becomes clearer. She sees the ceiling with a chandelier, blinks often. She looks around the room, familiar curtains, bedside table, cupboard with dishes, patterns. She understands that she is so back here again. She remembers someone calling her a princess in the desert. She thinks that this means she has encountered imperial knights. She wonders if this can be considered luck in the midst of a series of adversities. She hears a commanding voice asking the other what he just said. She immediately shudders, opens her eyes wide and recognizes Karnon's voice. She lifts herself up, straightens her back. There, the nurse makes excuses that they were some nameless kidnappers. Karnona says that means they were abducted by such worthless bandits. Dorothy thinks he came here because she was almost kidnapped. She reflects that, whatever it is, he is the father whose blood flows in her veins. She gets to her feet, trying to get out to him. But then she hears a terrible phrase from him that she is so much trouble. He orders not to make a fuss anymore, and to catch the one who gave this information out, and officially declare that these are just baseless rumors, and anyone who spreads them will be severely punished. The nurse bows and obediently agrees. Because of her greed, Dorothy began to think that Karnon's hatred for her had decreased, because she did not quarrel with Ray and did not take anything from him. But still he did not love her at all. She flops back into bed and decides that this is all punishment for being a tyrant, and now she is paying for the sins she committed in her past life. She lies down, turns the other way, covers herself with a blanket and continues to reflect sadly. That's right, she believes that everything is exactly like that. Otherwise it would be unbearable for her to endure all this. In the palace, the healer reports that the temperature has just dropped to a slight heat. Of course, the princess is recovering, but so slowly. Another servant asks if she is okay. Dorothy thinks she's seeing this babysitter for the first time. She begins to say out loud that compared to the past, here she indulges in her thoughts again, that it looks like her nurse was fired after all. But if you think about it, it wasn't her fault, because she was always kind and took care of the princess with all her might. She lies in her thoughts that since this has happened, she just hopes that everything will be alright with the nurse. The doctor tells her that Dorothy should still go to a quieter place to rest and recover. Another nanny says that it's still better for the princess to stay in the castle. Another says that there is a great place in the Seritan domain where you can improve your health. Dorothy somehow hears the words, realizes that, in other words, this is an opportunity for her to leave the palace and move away from Karnon, Ray, and Theon with Julia, who will soon go to Epistemia, and also where no one will see her, to gain strength so as not to suffer as then. All this time she was afraid that she would re-enter the path of the tyrant, so she avoided this possibility. However, if she uses her power in the right way, maybe she can protect someone. She tells the servants out loud that she will go on vacation. To live well, you need strength. The nanny asks how it is possible to go there alone. Dorothy replies that it is too stuffy for her here. The servant says that she has never behaved like this, so why such stubbornness? Ray comes to her with flowers and informs her that the flowers have arrived. The nanny asks if he is young Lord Raymond. He asks Dorothy if she's okay today. Dorothy thinks he's been coming here every day since the kidnapping, so isn't he tired of it? Ray asks what they were talking about. The nanny replies that they discussed the possibility of the princess going on vacation to recover. Ray does not understand what kind of rest they are talking about. The servant replies that there is just a great castle in the Seritan domain where you can relax, because the climate is warm there, and proximity to the sea will help the princess to unwind. Ray is sad and worried that she is still much better unless she needs to go somewhere. Dorothy flatly says she wants to leave and advises Ray to leave here. The one with the puppy eyes holds out her name. Dorothy turns to Ray and, just in case, says that the fact that she was kidnapped is not his fault, so he does not need to come in vain. But she lowers her eyes and with a sad expression on her face says that if he hadn't asked her to leave the castle, then this wouldn't have happened. Dorothy sighs, looks at him and says it doesn't matter anymore because it's all in the past. Ray climbs up to her with a hug and asks if she really needs to go to this other castle. She asks, what's the big deal? He replies that then she will be there alone. Dorothy thinks in her head that she's still here, kind of alone. Ray thinks and suggests to her that it is better to go to Epistemia together. He says he will help her, which means let her stay here with him. Dorothy coldly and clearly replies that she can't go there. Ray asks with a guilty smile why she thinks that. Maybe she was scared because he said that studying in Epistemia is too difficult. He tells her that his clever Dorothy can do it. He asks her not to give up so easily. Dorothy thinks about his words. Did she give up easily? She concludes that he really doesn't know about anything at all. And after all, with what diligence she studied just to go there. On the day Karnon ordered her to refuse admission, how much did she? She does not finish the thought, decides that how could this fool know such a thing? She turns to him and says that everything has already been decided, that she will go to rest and recuperate. She asks him to stop talking about it already because she is so tired, and advises him to leave now. He only obediently leaves with a desire for Dorothy to rest. The door clicks. The nurse turns to Dorothy and says that young Mr. Raymond is behaving like this because he is worried about her. Dorothy says in her head that she knows that Ray is kind, and she is a villain because that's always been the case. So the uninvited guest needs to disappear as soon as possible. A few days later, Dorothy does leave. She is dressed in a light dress for the trip. She has a hat on her head, a yellow bow around her neck. She thinks that at such moments she is grateful to Carnon for his indifference. She could not have imagined that she would leave so quickly. She remembers Ray crying and begging her not to leave. She thinks it's a good thing that Carnon told Ray not to come out, because just thinking about his brother is noisy. Someone calls her a princess. She turns and sees Theon. He tells her with a smile that he heard she was going on vacation. She looks at him, at first rejoices, and then thinks that she does not want to see him at all right now. She sadly, lowering her eyes to the ground, replies that yes, she is going to the Seriton domain. Then he asks why he suddenly asked. He replies that, to be honest, he came because he wanted to give her something. He says that it's a relief that he wasn't late. He reaches into his pocket with his hand. Dorothy asks the question, is it really a gift to her? He says that, of course, nothing special. He takes out of his pocket 3 candies of different colors, red, yellow, and blue. He says he brought it because he was worried that she might get seasick. Dorothy looks at him in silence, without holding out her hand. Theon awkwardly asks, maybe she doesn't like sweets at all. She can't believe in her head, is it really Theon for her? She answers out loud that no, she likes it. She takes the sweets from his hands and thanks him for his care. Theon blushes and sadly asks that now they will not be able to see each other, because she suddenly goes on vacation so far away. He says he's sorry. These words make Dorothy blush even more. Theon then expresses his hope that she will recover and return as soon as possible. Dorothy can't believe he's really sorry about her leaving. She looks at the candy and agrees with him. She thinks that in her past life she has never felt anything like this. Is she really Theon? But suddenly she forbids herself to think so, because anyway Theon. She squeezes the candy in her palm and leaves, saying that she will go better. Theon wanted to stop her, but restrains himself, clenching his fists, and says that he hopes they will definitely meet again. She is already riding in the carriage and persuades herself to be cool. She looks at these candies and thinks that, however, Theon has thought of her. Her heart is pounding from these thoughts. She smiles and hugs these candies to herself. Clear sky, blue sea with waves, from which white foam comes out from hitting the rocks. Pleasant wind, bright sun. Dorothy is surprised and admires the whole view. She is wearing a red dress with bows, her hair is tied in 2 ponytails. She could not have imagined that she would be able to breathe deeply once she left the Imperial Palace, the place where she killed Ray. And then Theon died. If you think about it, she has only bad memories in the palace. That's right, everything turned out well. There is no trace of her being a tyrant in this place. He is still looking with a warm smile at these 3 candies that Theon gave. She thinks that maybe this is where she can start from the beginning. Someone knocks and calls her princess. It's the maid of the castle, Kara, who is worried about her because she asked her to wait a little. And what if she gets lost? She says that now they should only go with her. Dorothy thinks she's looking out for a weak princess in such a wilderness. It looks like she's been greatly demoted, but she's only a princess in appearance. So her interest in Dorothy will be short-lived. Clara says there is someone she would like to introduce. A man comes out to her. The servant says that he will serve her under her guidance. This is the knight Stefan Greenwall. He's a tall guy with dark hair, dark skin, and a scar on one eye. Dorothy sharply recalls the past, where he is sitting on his knees in front of her, and she tells him that the princess is addressing him. But he does not answer. She's with a sword in her hand. There's blood all around. She calls him the same impudent as always. He is kneeling in front of her with an arrow in his abdomen. This is the one who has reached the rank of vice captain. Dorothy tells him that it's a pity, because she really wanted to compete with him, and at such moments the wisest decision would be to answer her. In the best knightly order of the future called Radiance. She puts the sword on his shoulder and talks about the hope that he will not regret his choice. One day he died at her hands. Returning to the present, Stefan and Dorothy look at each other for a long time. The princess thinks that he is now 18 years old, which means that he has just entered the Shining. And at the moment when he needs to gain experience and abilities to advance. He came here because of one weakling, a princess. And if you think about it, he seems unhappy to her. She holds out her hand to him and says she hopes for him. Clara is surprised that she has such a radiant greeting. But the knight does not extend his hand to her and stands silently. Clara hints to him about a handshake. He also holds out his hand, but does not squeeze it, but only slaps it on the palm. Clara looks at him in shock. Dorothy thinks, did she ask to slap her hand? He, as always, is insolent in the presence of the princess. Already in the hall, Dorothy, signing some document, thinks that the fact that she met Stefan just a couple of minutes ago suggests that one desire is not enough for a prosperous life, because life is not going the way she wants. She writes a wish list for a prosperous life, so in order to achieve her goal, she needs to create her own criteria. However, she wonders what it means to live kindly in general. She thinks hard and tries to come up with something. A servant approaches her and asks her to try dessert. She brings cookies and tea with milk. Here Dorothy sharply asks Clara what needs to be done to live happily. Clara thinks at first, and then says that first you need to obey your parents. Dorothy says to tell her something else. Clara stops talking and asks what she's doing. She sees a piece of paper with the name and laughs. Stefan appears behind her and also tries to spy on her. Dorothy abruptly closes the paper and asks angrily and awkwardly why they are laughing. Clara replies that a prosperous life sounds so cute, so she couldn't resist. Stefan in the background nods in agreement. Dorothy thinks that these words don't go with her at all. Clara asks why she writes like this, to which Dorothy replies that it's just like that. And in his head he says that, of course, in order to live safely. Clara offers her to give Dad a massage 10 times. Dorothy presents this picture, calls it disgusting and asks not to suggest such a thing. Clara says that if you don't like it, then how about smiling 10 times a day? She justifies this theme so that everyone will become brighter from a smile. Stefan nods again in silent agreement. Dorothy thinks it's not that she doesn't like to smile, she just had nothing to smile about, that's all. But if you think about it, the first thing that comes to mind about a kind person is a smiling face. She remembers Ray with a big smile and concludes that there is some truth in Clara's words. She smiles and wonders if that's how it's done. But abruptly her mouth twitches. Her attempts have already caused a spasm on her lips. Clara asks what is wrong with her. She pushes the two of them, asking them to come out for a minute because she wants to think. Clara says she would like to observe. The door closes. She picks up a pen and starts writing. First, smile in a friendly way every day. Second, do not look at someone else's. The throne belongs to Ray, and Theon belongs to Julia. The third, save 1,000,000 people. She thinks saving people is kind enough. She reflects on how many people died through her fault in her past life, not only the people she killed with her own hands, but also those who died during the wars unleashed by her, and the exhausting work through her fault, catastrophes and illnesses that she could not prevent. She is sure that at least 500,000 people died because of this. People who could have lived if Ray had become emperor died because of her. Therefore, as a penance, she wants to save 2 times more in this life, and 3 times a week to hear words of gratitude. Every month to donate more than 1,000,000 blands to charity. She looks at the list and thinks that this is enough for a successful life. She goes out on the balcony, stretches and thinks how tired she is. She looks at the sea. Then she approaches the servants and informs them that she will go to the sea. Stefan and Dorothy are walking along the shore. She looks at Stefan and thinks that she said she wanted to go to the sea, and he followed her, but, fortunately, he does not interfere, and is silent. She takes off her hat and thinks how quiet it is. It seems to her as if she is alone. While walking, she notices a man sitting by the shore. She wonders who it is. Does someone else live in the vicinity besides the inhabitants of the castle? He sees a blond boy with golden eyes, from which tears are pouring. She sees him and recognizes him as Bront. He was the most important confidant of the tyrant Dorothea Millenio, and the most beautiful man in the world she knew, and he was also the most dangerous.